A woman appears with 2 children and a single, unnegotiable demand. They come with her. My hand still smelled of linseed when I saw them on the lane, 2 small shapes half buried in dust, and a woman who carried herself like a thing that needed no pity. The porch remembered my boots, and the house remembered its silence. I had measured my days in chores and the long, patient absence of another voice. I liked it that way. She stepped onto the boards without ceremony, the children pressed close, their clothes patched, their eyes always sliding to the horizon as if expecting trouble. She did not ask for charity. Her voice was a flat, workable thing. I won't be separated from them. The sentence landed like a law. You learn, after years alone, how to tell when someone uprightly refuses to be broken. She offered a fact: 2 children, my roof, and her refusal to be parted. Perhaps it was the way she looked at the hearth, as if measuring whether the house could hold people as well as tools. Perhaps it was the boy tucking his face into his sleeve, or the girl's steady jaw. I could have shut the door. What I said was practical: room, food, work, but the words felt softer than I expected. By the time they'd put down their packs and taken the chairs, the house altered. Extra bowls at the table like a small covenant. A child's hand testing the edge of the table as if proving it would hold. They learned my rhythm quick. The girl took to stacking wood with quiet industry. The boy watched me mend a fence until his hands knew the grain. A tenderness I'd folded away, careful and useful, unfurled. It wasn't foolishness. It was like learning to plow again after a long winter, awkward at first, then inevitable. We ate together that night beneath a single lamp. After the children were coaxed to bed, breathing small and regular, the woman sat and said plainly, "We stay together." No pleading, no flourish, just the sort of promise that ties you by slow degrees. I used to count rooms like ledgers. What could be fixed? What could be left alone? She rearranged blankets with the same economy she had in her voice, folding sorrow into neat stacks as if it were laundry. The girl watched me with a look that was not curiosity, but assessment, like a person deciding whether a tool is fit for work. The boy kept fingering a chipped tin cup until his knuckles went white, and when he glanced up, he trusted me with a look that frightened me with its plainness. I went out to lock the shed. On the step, 3 pairs of boots lined up, small, smaller, and the steady work boot I knew by feel. The sight hit me with a stupid, fierce kind of joy. I had invited a mess into my ordered life and already resented the thought of that order returning. She touched my hand without looking at me, and for the first time her face softened. She said, "They'll not be taken." It was not a vow to me so much as to the world. My throat closed around the choice I'd just made. From the ridge a sound came, hooves, distant and steady, deciding to cross the plain.
Extra bowls, scrubbed pots, and a man who listens for the first time in years. The first morning after they came, the house misremembered my order and then made new rules. The girl swept with a broom the size of her arm and moved like she'd always known the work. The boy climbed the pantry steps and named jars as if naming was a way to hold a life steady. He dusted the sugar tin with a tenderness I hadn't expected. I taught them to fetch water from the well. When I handed the girl a hammer to set a stubborn nail, she took it like a promise, face forward, focused. Her fingers closed around the handle, and I felt that sharp, simple thrill you get watching someone learn to shape the world. The boy followed me to the fence and shadowed my hands. watching how I threaded wire and turned posts. He asked exact questions, small and serious, and I answered. The woman moved through our rooms with the steadiness of someone who'd been careful with what people entrusted her. She folded shirts, mended collars, boiled stew without fuss. When she made beds, she tucked the corners tight as a vow. Night came, and the house made its small sounds, settling timber, the barn's animal breath. The children slept with the quiet put there by honest work. I sat on the porch rail, cataloging them. The girl's jaw caught in lamplight, the boy's even breathing, the woman's shoulders loosened just a hair. These were small mercies, and with each one the house felt less like a shelter and more a living thing that expected care in return. A sound pulled at me, a hiccup, then a sob, muffled by thin boards. It should have been easy to ignore. I had practiced such refusals, but the house keeps what you put in it, and my balance tipped. I stood and pushed the door open. She sat by the hearth, face buried, hands clenched. She did not look up. Her sobs were quiet, old, and shuddered by habit. I thought of offering a hand or an explanation, but the sentences jammed in my throat like stones. So I boiled water and set the kettle between us. We let the steam stitch a small neutrality, the way a farmer sets fence posts to mark a line. The children breathed in the next room. The boy's small foot found a rhythm, thump, 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 like a heart learning to belong. I wanted to tell her about the years I'd kept the place, about a wife's laugh and a field gone to chaff, but those stories are weights. Instead, we kept to small, honest acts, mending, sweeping, bringing in wood. She looked at me then with a steadier gaze than before, and for the first time I felt that look pass between us like a quiet agreement. Outside, a careful paced rhythm began, like a bootfall learning the lane. The wind shifted and iron whispered. I watched her face, and she met my eyes without armor. There was a question in the line of her mouth I hadn't been asked to answer. Then the scrape of metal again, closer. Something moving along the lane toward the house.
A greasy note folded into an apron. Someone is coming to take what's been claimed. I found it at noon, tucked where she'd left the cloth, corners stained with grease, and a short line of words in a hand that didn't bother with kindness. The paper went cold in my palm like an accusation. The house around me hummed, hens, the girl's low humming, the boy's hammer, but the note made those sounds thin. The words were one sentence and a name. That name carried the weight of a wet, angry thing, a man who thought children were property. I folded the paper the same way and slid it into my coat. There is a time for promises and a time for counting rounds. I walked to the shed. You learn to number what you can't say. I counted shells, checked the spare rifle's latch, slid the old revolver into its leather like a question. The act steadied me. It's odd how a man's hands remember certain violence, the way a horse remembers a trail. I'd meant to be a farmer. A house does not ask your plans. When I told them, the woman did not flinch. She took the boy's hand and said flat, "If he's coming, we'll meet him as we are." The girl folded her torn shirt and set it aside. Her jaw went hard. The children looked smaller and sharper at once. We made practical choices. Extra splints on the barn windows, The back gate left unlatched for a quick move, water jugs by the door. The barn loft held blankets and supplies. Each stack was a vote for keeping what we had. I taught the boy how to prime a cartridge and told him only to aim if there was no other choice. He nodded like a man given a tool. I thought of old sounds, the snap of a rifle, a man's breath gone tight, and how quickly the body remembers what the mind pretends it forgot. The woman watched me without pity or pleading. There was only a hard, steady plan between us. Neighbors' windows stayed dark, as if the plane itself held its breath. That night we slept in fits, the moon making bars across the floor. The name on the note flashed through my head like an ember. I thought of the claimant's face as entitlement on a horse. At dawn I walked the ridge with the woman at my side. She carried a tin cup. I carried a rifle. Far off, near the gullied hollow, dust rose. At first it might have been one rider, then two, then more. Shapes and horses bent the grass. Something tightened behind my breastbone. They were not paper anymore. They were coming. We walked back to the house with a deliberate step that felt like marching. The boy met my eye, and in it I read the question he'd not yet learned to ask. What will you do if they come? My palm closed on the rifle's stock as if answering for both of us. Outside, something knocked. 3 steady bangs on the garden gate.
She lines up the sight, breathes, and the bottle breaks. She's protecting more than glass. The barn became a schoolhouse. We strung bottles and tin plates along the fence and set targets at measured paces. Lessons began with small, exact things. How to mount a rifle so it doesn't jab your jaw, where to set your cheek, how to steady the breath until the world narrows to bead and glass. The girl learned almost without surprise. She took the stock to her shoulder as if she'd been born for it. The boy learned to count hits and misses, to clean the barrel with sure hands, and to note the scuff of a boot in soft earth. Teaching them was like teaching a plow line, slow at first, then steady. Domestic work became training. Carrying water taught quiet steps. Stacking hay taught concealing between bales. Fixing a gate taught hands that move fast and true. The woman taught the subtler trade, listening. She'd hush them and point to how a horse's breathing changes with speed, how gravel sounds different from packed lane. These were small tools of survival, more useful than prayers. Pride in them was a low, stubborn thing. When the girl hit a bottle at 20 paces, she didn't grin. She exhaled, reset the target, and moved on. The boy mended a leather strap with a patience that felt like mending more than harness, like stitching a life back together. Watching them, I felt the old skeleton of me knit into something new, protective, practical, and more willing to be bound. We rehearsed scenarios briskly, demand papers at the door, move the children to the cellar if night falls, scattered to prearranged cover if the door goes. The barn loft became our lookout, the back gate our planned exit. Repetition turned fear into habit. Panic is wasted work, so we learned to trade it for routine. There were bright, human moments. Laughter when a bottle spun off its peg, a small cheer after a clean hit, a child's fist against my palm for encouragement. Those soft things kept us from becoming all hardness. Late afternoon, as shadows lengthened, the boy came back from the gate with a scrap of linen clenched in his fist. He held it out, breathless, without a word. The fabric bore a rough-stitched mark, a brand I hadn't seen around here in years, the sort tied to men who kept bad company. "We're not alone," he said, voice thin but steady. I looked toward the ridge. The lane lay empty, save for a faint line of dust where it dipped. A crow lifted and circled, uneasy. The girl's knuckles went white on the stalk. The boy folded his hands in a motion that had been practiced in other houses and harder times. Thumbnail beats. The girl's cheek against the rifle stock as sunlight strikes glass. The boy holding the torn linen tag, eyes fixed on the ridge. Outside, a shadow stepped the far horizon, too distant to name, but close enough that my heart began to tally beats. A polished man demands blood rights. A blunt proposal becomes the family's public shield. They came, 3 riders along the lane. Boots shined like they were ashamed of dust. The first off the sorrel had eyes the color of river mud and a mouth used to taking. "Those children belong to me," he said, voice like a ledger. "By blood, return them and it's done quiet." He dismounted with that insolence of a man who thinks doors open at his name. The woman stood in the doorway, the children behind her. I felt a hot, slow anger. Men like him reckon kin is property. "I don't believe you," I said. "You got no paper, and I don't hand children over to men with mouths full of claims." He laughed, spat. "Papers'll come. Men like me don't ask twice. We take what's ours first. You can give 'em up or make 'em yours properly. There's law written and law lived. Sometimes a social mark matters as much as ink." On the ridge of that thought, I chose a blunt tool. "Then make 'em mine," I said, loud enough for everyone. "I'll marry you. We'll be a family in front of folk. Any man who wants to dispute that will have to face more than one man at the door." I meant it as a posture, but the woman's face changed. She tested the word, not laughing. She said, "Marry you?" And the question was not mockery, but weighing. "A name and witnesses," I answered. "It's a claim that's harder to take." The claimant chewed on it like a man choosing between brandy and beer. He said, "Put a ring on her by dawn. If you don't, we'll come back with men who don't waste words." As if to underline the threat, one of his men pitched a calf, dead and bloody, onto the yard. It hit the frost with a wet sound and lay there obscene as a warning. The boy gripped the woman's skirt. The girl didn't break her stare. She reached for my hand and held it like someone testing if my grip was steady. She said, "They'll not be separated." "Then do it by dawn," the claimant called over his shoulder as they mounted. "We give you till the sun." The dust rose from their hooves, carrying their threat. The yard smelled of iron and frozen blood. I could think of 1,000 things, papers, witnesses, a preacher in the morning, but time was a narrow path. She looked at me, ringless and steady. She asked, "Do you mean it?" I nodded. "Marriage is armor.
Marriage as a promise that would bind us, not just by feeling, but by sight. I set a lantern by the door and went inside to gather what witnesses and vapors I could rustle for the morning. Dawn would not wait for hesitation. Outside, a single sharp whistle cut the air, a sound like a starting clock.
Morning shatters. The first shot comes from a child, and the rest follows like thunder. Dawn poured a thin silver cold across the yard. We sat with our backs to the hearth like men at a table before a reckoning. Who watched the lane? Who held the back gate? Where the children would go if the door broke? The claimant's time had run out. A plate smashed on the porch as a signal, and the first rifle barked. The girl's shot cut the morning. The bottle she'd aimed at exploded, and the report rang off the barn. For a moment, the world split, and all the polite small things I had kept inside me scattered. Sense collapsed into work. The claimant's man came in a small, ordered wave. The yard filled with the smell of gun oil and fear. The boy moved without hesitation, hands finding a place for a rifle. His face was set in a way far older than his years. The woman took the children below to the cellar with the practiced calm of someone who had carried worse and chosen to stay. I moved on muscle memory, edge to cover, eye on the ridge, commands in short, clean syllables. Man fell, one near the well with a surprised little sound, another whimpering on the lane. The field grew a litter of small calamities, each a sharp, private account. I never liked killing. It changes you more than being changed. Still, when a pistol rose toward the porch and aimed for the woman's shape, I fired. He folded like a sack, and the sound of my rifle felt obscene and necessary at once. The girl's second shot clipped a man's shoulder and sent him stumbling. She did not look triumphant, only very steady. Later, she would scrub her hands as if trying to wash out something heavier than dirt. The claimant charged with the weight of a man who believed the law of his blood covered his sins. We grappled among the scattered hay bales. No gentleman's duel, just the wet grunt of bodies and the scrape of leather. He carried a mean habit for violence. I had a stubbornness for holding what I had chosen to keep. I could have ended him cleanly. Instead, I kept my hands and used a length of harness to bind him, felt the rough fibers bite into his wrists. I shoved him toward the cellar mouth where the woman stood with the children, a public placement, not a grave. No more blood on this ground, I told him, and my voice sounded like the last honest argument I had. He spit and cursed, but his breath came ragged, and defeat tasted in his mouth. The remaining man edged back, not yet broken, but listening for the sound that would tell them whether to return. One spat by my boot and warned of reinforcements. Another muttered about riders out of ways. We watched the ridge, ears stretched to the plain. In the thin quiet after the shots, the boy looked at me as if he expected instructions or applause. I had none to give, only a steady gaze. The woman folded her hands and breathed. The barn smelled of smoke and iron. The world was raw with what we'd done. A thin metallic whistle cut the air, close and deliberate, answering the fallen quiet like a summons.
A creaking door and a vanished child. A father tracks 3 miles to bring him home. The back door hung open like a careless promise. A child's tin cup tipped on the floor. A small shoe lay half buried in mud. That absence hit me harder than any shout. I ran without thinking, following prints that were small and quick, then joined by a heavier boot. We tracked him into gullied brush. The woman moved with a hush as someone who has carried worse and chosen to stay. The girl kept time beside her, jaw set. The boy's prints ended in a reed-scraped hollow. I crouched and read the ground. Scuff, drag, a snapped ribbon, the sticky sheen where a child had been clutched and hauled. The plane gives you signs if you know how to look. There was a lean-to where a man had slept. He lurched up when I stepped into the light. The smaller child sat against a log, face streaked with river mud, eyes big and hollow, but alive. Relief burned my chest. I gathered him up and felt him fold in like something saved from the rain. He did not sob. He only pressed his head into my shoulder and let his body go slack, as if he had been holding himself upright for so long that surrender was a strange new thing. The captor swore his rights, wages, debts, an old grudge. He made a motion for a knife. Reflex took me. I struck with the butt of the rifle and the man went down cursing. I bound him before he could pull free. The woman's hand tightened on the girl's arm. I saw the calculation in her face, whether to let a man die or to make him live with shame. Mercy, I decided, could be a kind of holding him one more time with consequences he couldn't walk from. Killing's easy. Choosing not to kill is a harder, longer thing. I led the bound man back. Neighbors watched us pass with quiet approval. The boy, safe, clung to his shoulder and breathed like someone given a second chance. At the gate, I could have handed the captor to the sheriff, but I thought of paper and loopholes. Blood settles on the land and people move on. Records remain. Instead, I rode him out of the valley, left him with a warning and a list of names I'd told the women at market to carry. Exile rarely kills a man, but it narrows the roads he can take. Later, while the boy slept and the woman washed his face, I checked the captor's pockets. A folded scrap of ink sat there, neat columns, names, figures. At the bottom, an address in town and a sum owed to a man with a ledger the size of a Bible. This was no random thief. It smelled of debt and men who buy trouble with a price. The scrap fit into a small pocket in my coat like a seed. If the claimant had been pushed by a creditor, we had not only a thug to worry about, but a system that fed him. I folded the paper twice and slid it into my boot, feeling the weight of a trouble that didn't begin with our gate. A lone horse's silhouette passed on the ridge, slow and deliberate. Someone was coming, and the ledger in my boot felt suddenly heavier than any rifle.
A plain band slipped on, pear saplings in the ground. The house finally claims a family. Seasons taught me the price of promises. After the winter's hard quiet, we planted pear saplings along the ridge, small trunks set like vows, dig, drop, cover, press. Kneeling in the dirt, I felt the work stitch a private law into the ground. Ink could bind a man on paper, but a tree roots alive. Mornings took on a new, ordinary shape. The children ran between rows, counting buds. The girl showed the boy which trunks graft better. The woman moved through the kitchen with a laugh that surprised even herself. The sheriff came sometimes, tipped his hat, and let his eyes find the ledger I'd pulled from the bound man's coat. "Debt's a different beast," he said once, "harder to kill." He left without promises, only a look that told me the town had its own compromises. We married at dawn, plain as the land. Neighbors came. The preacher spoke simple words. The sheriff stamped witness. The children held carved flowers and squirmed. I slipped a band on her finger, and the ring fit like the last small truth I'd been keeping. After, We planted the last sapling together. The girl's face was streaked with soil. The boy lugged a bundle of roots. We pressed the earth until it stopped sinking. Roots take time, I told them. They take work and weather. The woman watched us with the look of someone who had chosen a life that might hurt and still be worth it. Mercy had become a contour of my life. I spared a man and sent him walking with exile rather than burial. That choice wasn't softness, it was setting a line for the rest of the valley to read. But mercy did not erase paper. The ledger in my boot sat like a knife I'd learned to carry every day. Late that afternoon, I found a folded paper on the porch step with the town clerk's red wax. My thumb found the seal and the cold went through me. I could have opened it then, let the writing decide our steps. Instead, I walked to the sapling we had just set and smoothed the soil with my palm. The children clustered close, waiting for me to tell them what to do next. Teach them, guard them, give them a life. The woman slipped her hand into mine and squeezed. For a breath, everything inside the house, boots by the door, a kettle beginning to sing, felt like a single pulse. I stood, dirt under my nails and the sealed paper burning in my coat like a second pulse. I looked at the children, small, bright, and terrible with trust, and told them we would meet whatever came together. Then from the ridge came the slow, deliberate clop of many hooves. Not a single rider this time. Dark shapes moved the plain like a shadow with weight. I stayed where I was, sap-stained and steady, feeling the ledger in my coat like a second heartbeat.